Hey, pals. How are you tonight? Happy Wednesday. Hope you're all doing well. And welcome to True Crime Wednesday. For those of you who might just be joining us, my name is Lori Hellis. I am a retired criminal attorney and have written a book about the Lori Vallow Chad Daybell case. Welcome. On every Wednesday night, we get together to talk about true crime cases. Those of you who know that the Chad Daybell's trial started on Monday with jury selection. And sorry, I have a bit of a cold. I will let everybody know that I'm only going to manage about an hour tonight. It's been a really busy week already, trying to get our house ready to go on the market, and having a little bit of a cold as well. So I'm feeling a little rundown tonight. So bear with me if the old bean isn't working quite as quickly as usual. So I do want to talk about the Daybell trial, and specifically I want to talk about jury selection, kind of in general. As you all know, Chad's trial started on Monday, and the court started jury selection. So hundreds of jury subpoenas were sent out. People were given jury questionnaires and asked to fill them out and bring them back in, so that both defense and prosecution could go over the questionnaires, look to see whether or not there were any immediate red flags, and then bring people back in for jury questioning. So that process has been going on since Monday. I think they've actually already seated about 20, so there's probably another 30 or so that they need to seat. From that, they will do their peremptory challenges, and they will winnow that down to 18, I believe. That's what they did, the number they used for Lori's trial, and I'm assuming they will do the same for Chad's trial. Now, Lori's trial was 6 weeks. Chad's trial is estimated to be 8 to 10 weeks, probably closer to that 10-week mark. That's for a variety of reasons. One, this is a death penalty case. Lori's case, at the last minute, the court took off the death penalty because of discovery violations. The prosecutor, that happened when the prosecutor didn't turn over discovery the way they were supposed to. And the judge, as a consequence, took the death penalty off for Lori. So Chad is still facing the death penalty. And the other reason is, well, it's a death penalty case. So the guilt innocence phase is going to be more detailed. Then we have John Pryor, who has already said he is going to mount a more spirited defense than Lori's attorneys did, because Lori's attorneys essentially didn't mount a defense. Pryor reports that he's got 7 experts, that he's probably got other witnesses besides that, and so don't be surprised if his portion takes a week or more. Then once the guilt and innocence phase is over, we still have to go to the penalty phase if Chad is found guilty. If he's found guilty, then there will be a hearing to put on evidence as to whether the death penalty should be imposed, or whether instead he should receive life without parole. And that process is the state putting on their evidence of the heinousness of the crimes, and John Pryor putting on any mitigating evidence that would tilt in Chad's favor. So I did want to just talk about, in general, jury selection. You know, there is many opinions about jury selection, how to do it, how important it is, as there are lawyers out there doing it. Some lawyers sort of come down on the side of, give me 12 people who have not formed an opinion, who can see and hear and read and write, and I'm satisfied. Other attorneys feel like they can really begin to inoculate the jury, if you will, to their case in jury selection. And there are attorneys who look at it all as like water witching, it's like divining and trying to figure out what's in people's heads and watching their body language, and there are people who say it's all smoke and mirrors. So I guess I come down some place in the middle. There are attorneys who absolutely believe that you can win your case in jury selection. I'm not sure that's true, but I am sure that it's true that you can lose your case in jury selection if you are not cautious about the jurors that are selected. So let's talk a little bit about that. What's an ideal juror from the defense standpoint versus the prosecution standpoint? Now, the prosecution obviously wants witnesses who are going to listen to the facts and easily see how those facts align with the elements of the crime, with the law. They're looking for people who are law and order people. They're looking for people who are very law-abiding, and they're looking for people who read the world black and white. They like cops. They like engineers. They like people who are very concrete in the way they think. The defense, on the other hand, is looking for people who are a little bit less likely to believe an authority. They're more suspicious of people who are who believe everything they read. They're more suspicious of people. They're a little bit suspicious of authority. They're a little bit suspicious of the government. Those are the kind of people that the defense is looking for. They're looking for people who are willing to say, yes, cops can be wrong. Yes, things can not be what they appear. Things maybe and coincidences can happen, and the prosecution is looking for people who are much more black and white and concrete. So defense attorneys often like teachers. They like people who are interested in politics. They like people who are who volunteer in nonprofits. Those sorts of folks who are there that they have interest in. And I mean, I've seen lawyers go as far as to ask people, what do you watch on TV? What's your favorite TV program? And they're trying to get to who this person is and what it is that they like or they believe in. Or so, I mean, if you get somebody that says, oh, I don't watch anything but PBS, I only watch public broadcasting, that's a certain kind of a person in general. Now, we're making these sort of blanket judgments about people. And but in general, somebody who watches PBS is probably a certain kind of person, as opposed to somebody who gets all their news from a conservative news source like Fox. Those people are going to be different jurors. Now, it doesn't mean that they're any better or worse, or that they're any more or less likely to be swayed by emotion or one side or the other. It merely means that they probably evaluate information slightly differently. So ultimately, you want people who are going to evaluate information and be able to follow the judge's directions. So here is an interesting thing. I'm going to pull it up on my computer and I'm going to look away because I'm going to read a bit of it. So recently, the state asked Judge Boyce to issue a limiting instruction having to do with whether or not the jury was going to hear that Lori Vallow had already been convicted. So what the judge said was to address, this instruction is given to address the concern of jury speculation regarding the status of Ms. Vallow as a named co-conspirator in the amended indictment in Chad's case. So the judge said he was going to give this jury instruction. The defendant, Chad Guy Daybell, has been charged in the amended indictment with certain counts of entering into a conspiracy with Lori Vallow Daybell and or Alex Cox. The crime of conspiracy involves an agreement by two or more persons to commit a crime. You must only consider the evidence against the defendant, Chad, in this case, and should not speculate as to any other case or legal proceedings involving the alleged co-conspirators. You must remember that the defendant has the presumption of innocence, and you must consider his guilt or innocence based solely on the evidence provided in this case. Now, the judge also said he was instructing the prosecution to refrain from eliciting the issue of Lori Vallow's trial or her conviction during the jury selection and during the trial. So the judge said to them, you need to be cautious that you are not bringing up the fact that Lori has already been tried and convicted, either in jury selection or in the trial. But the judge said that it's still possible that prospective jurors or the jury panel may hear that Lori has been tried and convicted. So the court came up with an alternative curative instruction. So if at some point, and y'all will want to watch for this, if at some point Lori's guilt or her trial comes up, the judge has drafted this possible curative instruction. Now, he's only going to give this instruction if, in fact, the outcome of Lori's trial comes up before the jury. So excuse me, having a little bit of a cough tonight. The judge is only going to give this instruction if it comes out during the trial or during jury selection that Lori's been convicted. You just heard that one of the named co-conspirators, Lori Vallow Daybell, has already been tried and convicted, found guilty by a jury in a separate trial. You are not to draw an inference of guilt for Chad Daybell in this case based on that information. In this case, you must remember that Chad has the presumption of innocence, and when you deliberate, you must consider his guilt or innocence based solely on the evidence provided in this case. Do not be concerned about the punishment or potential punishment of any of the named co-conspirators, or speculate about any other cases. Your duty is to try this case before you and base your decisions exclusively on the evidence presented at this trial. So the judge is making it very clear that they are not to consider that. Now, for those of you who watched Lori's trial, you may remember that while Charles Vallow's death came up and the manner in which he was murdered came up, it was not revealed that Lori had been charged in that case, because that would have been information that would have been especially prejudicial to Lori. I think that it would be very difficult for a jury to look at that and say, oh, she's been charged. Well, then she must be guilty of that too. So the judge has issued those instructions in order to kind of alleviate some of that, of the concern over whether or not Chad could be prejudiced if that information comes out. So the process of questioning jurors is called voir dire. There are many different ways to pronounce this. That's the way I learned to pronounce it. V-O-I-R. The French pronunciation would be voir. The Latin pronunciation would be voir. And D-I-R-E, dear. Some people, Judge Boyce pronounces it voir dire. And I think that's a very typical sort of Middle West and Southern way of pronouncing it. But either way, it's one of the few Latin phrases that we still use in the law, sort of like ex parte and pro bono and pro per and a few other of those little phrases that we use. So voir dire is just the process by which we question jurors to find out whether or not they have any preconceived notions about the specific case, or whether they hold beliefs that would make it impossible for them to sit on this jury. So, for example, there have been lots of questions about whether or not each individual juror could impose the death penalty if Chad were found guilty. Because the same jury who decides guilt or innocence will decide the penalty phase as well. But they are two really separate hearings. So the guilt or innocence phase will happen. You'll get closing arguments. The jury will deliberate. They will come back with a verdict. If the verdict is guilty, then they will convene the penalty phase. And that is a separate proceeding. It also has some separate rules of evidence. In a lot of cases, the rules of evidence are relaxed in a penalty phase. So it's more possible that hearsay will come in, that there won't be quite so much concern about whether a fact comes in and is prejudicial to Chad, because at this point his guilt has already been established. Now they're discussing whether or not there's any mitigation, any facts that would weigh in Chad's favor against imposing the death penalty. So, so the next step then is they've started out voir dire by going through and talking to people about, do you understand this is going to be an 8 to 10 week trial? And do you understand that you're going to be required to be here every day, and we need to know if that is going to create a hardship for you or for your family. So in the instance where the juror is the sole support of their family, or a caregiver for their child, caregiver for an ailing family member, or they are, the sole proprietor in a business, all of those things the court takes into consideration. And we saw quite a few people who, one side or the other, moved the court to dismiss that juror because of hardship. We saw several people who said, I don't get that kind of time off from my employer. And it really varies from organization to organization. A lot of government organizations give people jury leave, and they receive their salary while they're on jury duty. Some larger companies do that. However, there are not very many small businesses that can afford to give somebody 6 to 8 weeks off to go do jury duty and continue to pay them. So it is a hardship for smaller businesses. A lot of people have asked about juror pay. It is next to nothing. In a lot of places, I think I read somewhere it's $20 a day here in Idaho. But there are a lot of jurisdictions where it's $10 a day and mileage. That won't even buy your lunch. Now, the other thing about the jury is that they will not be sequestered for the guilt and innocence phase. So they will be able to go home at night, and they'll come like they did in Lori's case. They will come to the courthouse every morning. They will sign an affirmation that they have not watched or listened to anything having to do with the trial. I would not be surprised to see the jury sequestered during the penalty phase. That is not unusual, to have the jury sequestered during the phase where they're deciding whether or not to impose the death penalty. So the jurors will be able to go home, and there were several of them that were saying, well, I'll be trying to work a few hours when I get home. Now, Judge Boyce has ordered that court end by 3:30 each day, and that is to leave time for the attorneys to bring any administrative kinds of things to the court, and for the opportunity to get their witnesses lined up for the next day. Now, on the prosecution side, that isn't really that big a deal. They've got 5 attorneys sitting at their table, and they've got a whole staff of support staff. So they've got folks who are able to do those things for them. However, John Pryor does not. He may have one administrative person, but in general, he's doing this case alone. Now, one of the things that I noticed while I was watching jury selection is that the prosecutors are kind of trading off who's asking the questions. So let's say Rob Wood questions some of the jury panel, and then he sits down. He then can make all of his notes about his impressions of the jurors, or whether he's got concerns about the jurors, while one of the other lawyers stands up and begins the questioning. John Pryor doesn't have that luxury. He's got to be on that and making those notes contemporaneously as he is questioning jurors. It is very, very difficult. This is one of the reasons why we see co-counsel in an awful lot of cases, in death penalty cases, because it is very difficult to do all that other stuff while you are actively questioning a juror. And you're keeping your chart of which number juror this is, and taking notes and doing all of those things. But you're having to do that on the fly, because you also are at the moment having to think on your feet and ask these jurors questions. Now, every lawyer has a slightly different, a different approach and a little bit different manner in which they question jurors. But it is important to remember that this is an opportunity for all of the lawyers, for the jurors to get a glimpse at all of the lawyers and the judge and the court staff. So as much as it is the jurors, the attorneys and the judge finding out about the jurors, it's also the jurors finding out a little bit and creating impressions of the attorneys as well. John Pryor tends to have a pretty conversational style. I think early on people thought that he was being a little bit ingratiating, and that it might that it might turn jurors off. But I do think that that he does have a sort of disarming style, and that plays well with juries sometimes. I think he has been able to put jurors at ease as he's asking them kind of intrusive questions. And he is certainly more folksy, maybe, than the prosecutors. The prosecutors, both Lindsay Blake and Rob Wood, are pretty stiff and pretty right down the line professional. Not that they're not breaking a smile. They're not, and jurors notice that. Female attorneys sometimes walk a bit of a fine line, because they don't want to seem too friendly and too cutesy, because people don't take them seriously. But they also want to appear warm or engaging. And so it is a little bit of a fine line. I definitely think John Pryor is, of all of the lawyers we've seen so far, either in Lori's case or in Chad's case, I think he is the most folksy, and a lot of people like that. Say what you might about John Pryor. Now, what I will say is that John Pryor is like a lot of male attorneys who I dealt with during my career. I find him to be kind of typical. He's a little bit of a backslapper. He's kind of a posturer. He can get kind of pushy and angry, but it's all an act. It's all the way that he behaves in front of jurors and in front of the court, and I tended to be more of the what you see is what you get, but we all have to put on some, we all have to be aware of how jurors in particular perceive us. So, you go into a trial, I would go into a trial and think, I don't want these jurors to think that I'm a stone cold bitch. But on the other hand, I don't want them to think I'm kind of an airhead either. I want it's more of a tightrope to walk as a woman. And I think that it's easier for men, and particularly men who are experienced and been around a while. They definitely have more of that attitude of, I have to go in and project this particular persona. So I know a lot of people find him really annoying. But on the other hand, I guess I see where he's going. I mean, I may kind of roll my eyes and think, oh, John, nobody wants to hear about the time you went fishing. But I see where he's going. And I see that he's using those kinds of metaphors to talk about the legal issues. And I think he's doing okay with it. I don't think any of them are putting on a perfect case. The prosecution didn't put on a perfect case the first time. And this is going to be their second run at it. So we'll see. But I don't necessarily think that they're going to put a perfect case on this time either. It's very difficult to do that. And there are lots of hiccups that happen in trials. So, I mean, we saw Melanie Pulowski come in and admit that she'd been watching Brandon Boudreaux's testimony and ended up that she didn't testify. We have seen we've seen several of those little hiccups. We saw David Warwick come in and admit that he'd been watching Melanie Gibbs' testimony because he was concerned about her. And so I don't know. I think as things go along, I think we'll see how well Pryor is able to keep all those juggling, keep all those plates spinning, because it is a really difficult thing. The other thing that's really difficult is you are working in the courtroom potentially 7 or 8 hours a day, going home at night, preparing for the next day, going over your notes, talking to witnesses, lining up the next day. And it is grueling. The longest trial I ever tried was 2 weeks, and it was incredibly hard. And so I can't imagine trying an 8 to 10 week trial alone. That's part of the problem, is that he's having to do it alone. And then you look around and think, okay, I've got to keep this grueling pace up for 8 to 10 weeks. How do I stay healthy? How do I stay healthy in a public setting where I'm in contact with lots of people all the time? And I am burning the candle at both ends, and I'm run down, and I've been preparing for this trial for months. And now I'm, now it's here, and I am, oftentimes by the time a lawyer gets to start trial, they're already running on empty. So it is a really tough time for all of the lawyers. But I think for John Pryor, it's particularly difficult because he's doing it alone. That means no safety net, he's out there on the tightrope with no net. He doesn't have somebody sitting behind him taking notes and jotting things down and reminding him of things. If you saw in Lori's trial, the prosecutor who was doing the questioning of the witness would ask all the questions and then would say, "Your Honor, may I have a minute?" and go over and lean over the prosecution table. They're asking, "Did I miss anything?" And every once in a while, the prosecutor would come back and say, "Your Honor, just one more question." And then they would pick that piece up. That's impossible to do if you're the only lawyer, because you don't have somebody sitting behind you keeping track of what you've asked and making sure that you haven't missed anything, or that you didn't miss a follow-up or any of those things. So it's hard to do a trial all on your own. And it's even harder when it is a complex death penalty case. So I can't imagine what John Pryor is going through right now. And this is only jury selection. He's got weeks and weeks and weeks of this grueling trial. So we don't know when jury selection will be over. We're all sort of, reading the tea leaves or looking at our crystal balls. I kind of think we're looking at midweek next week. I would be very surprised if they don't have a jury seated by Wednesday-ish. So I think they could seat a jury on Wednesday, and then Judge Boyce could do what he did in Lori's trial and send everybody home and say, come back in the morning and start opening statements. That wouldn't surprise me. So we'll see how far it gets. I will say that this morning, Judge Boyce sounded sick, which was a little concerning. He just sounded like he was tired, and he just sounded a little plugged up like I am. And I wondered, it made me wonder how they're going to keep all those people healthy enough to get through 10 weeks of trial. So before we before we launch into a couple of other cases that I wanted to touch on before we go to take questions, I did want to mention for everyone, there are still a few spots left on the book launch team. So if you have not joined the book launch team, please do. You can do that at thegoodlori.com. And what it is a group who agree to purchase the book and to post reviews about the book. And in order to make sure that you have a chance to read the book before it first comes out, we're going to be sending you a digital copy of the book, a PDF of the book in June. And once we're done with all the edits and it goes to the printer, then you will see the same document that the publisher is using to print the book. And that is so when the book hits the shelf on September 3rd, you all will be prepared to write reviews, because reviews are incredibly important to authors these days. And both Goodreads and Amazon don't allow you to post until the day the book releases, but we would love for you to be ready, willing, and have read the book and be ready and willing and able to post on the day the book drops. So in order to do that, we're asking that you read the book in advance. Now, there's some other perks that go along with that. I'm going to be sending out updates on the Daybell trial that you'll have exclusive access to. I'm going to be doing it throughout the month of August. I'm going to be doing Zoom call Q&A sessions for anybody who is signed up for the book launch, for the book launch group. And so there will be a few little goodies. You'll get a personalized and signed book plate for the inside of your book. And there'll probably be some other digital things that are going to be coming your way. So if you have not signed up, yes, it asks you for your purchase number. That's because we really want folks who are buying the book. So it will ask you for a purchase number. That's your order number, either on Amazon or at Barnes and Noble or wherever you buy your book. And that is the pre-order number. So I appreciate that everybody who's participating in the launch group are folks who have purchased the book. And I appreciate your support. I know that there are many of you out there who have already pre-ordered the book, and I appreciate it so much. I have not heard from my publisher yet how the pre-sales are going, but we'll find out. The other thing to remember is I'm going to be at CrimeCon. I'm going to have a booth there. We're going to be handing out stickers and swag, and we're going to be signing book plates for anybody who shows proof of pre-order. And we're just going to go and have a great time, meet lots of people who we meet online. And so I encourage you, if you can come to CrimeCon, please consider it. It is May 30th, sorry, through June 1st. And it is so much fun. You will not believe the stuff that is available, and the sessions and the stuff that you learn going to CrimeCon. So CrimeCon does use a lot of volunteers, people that are in CrimeCon t-shirts and stand around and direct traffic. and they give out passes for that. So the Crime Con links are in our show notes, and that includes links for volunteers as well. So please get in on that if you're at all interested, and I'll see you there. The crane quilt is still going on. Please, please, please. There is an origami crane pattern, link to an origami crane pattern that you can make a 6-inch quilt square. The only thing we ask is that you use a black background. Those squares are going to be put together into a quilt that will be done for Larry and Kay Woodcock. TERRI GOYINS has already offered to quilt the quilt top once we get it all together. And so I'm very excited about that. I hope you'll join me, make a square or two, drop it in the mail to me at my P.O. box, which is also in our show notes, and be part of this. In Japan, it is tradition to fold cranes as a memorial for someone who has passed. And they often talk about folding 1,000 cranes as being a level of commitment to that memory of that person. And so I thought it would be a nice way to commemorate Tylee and JJ for excuse me, for Kay and Larry. Before I wrap up the Daybell, I did want to mention that John Pryor, just the week before jury selection started, did a very brief television interview with a local Boise TV reporter. And it was really a nothing burger. I mean, it really was. He didn't really answer any questions. He sort of danced around about it, but he certainly didn't in any way give anything away. But the judge discovered that it had happened and issued a non-dissemination, it's a gag order, until closing or until opening statements. So you might remember that during Lori's trial, the press followed John Pryor around an awful lot, and he refused to talk to any of them. So I was a little surprised to see him give that interview. But like I say, it essentially was nothing. So before we take questions, I just have a couple of other fairly brief cases to talk about. The other one is Kohberger, because there are jury issues in the Kohberger case as well. Now, let's remember, Kohberger is the University of Idaho, Moscow, Idaho case. He's been accused of murdering 4 Moscow, Idaho students. So they have been going round and round and round about trial dates. I do not believe that we're going to see a trial in this case until the summer of 2025. There are several reasons for that. It's a death penalty case. There's a lot of other moving parts and pieces that go into it. And Moscow is a small college town, and the high school is right next door to the courthouse. And so the prosecution has been quick to point out that having a huge influx of people come into Moscow during the time when school is in session would be a real hardship for the city. And so they're asking that whatever trial date set, it be set when school's not in session, which means we're looking at next summer. Now, Kohberger's team has filed a motion to change venue out of Moscow because, once again, like Rexburg, it's a very small community. Now, this is kind of interesting because in every change of venue case I've seen before, the defense has done exactly what they did in the Daybell case and what they've done in the Kohberger case. Now, in the Kohberger case, the judge months ago issued a gag order. And the purpose of the gag order was so that they wouldn't disseminate information to potential jurors. But the defense has hired a survey company to do surveys in advance of this change of venue motion. And so they did 400 telephone surveys to find out what people already knew about the case. They did something similar in the Vallow case. They actually went out and did some door-to-door canvassing in that case. And in my experience, that has been typical for a change of venue motion, is to actually go out and give the court some concrete feedback about public knowledge and public attitudes about the case. And you do that by doing these surveys or canvassing. Well, somebody who received one of the phone calls called the prosecutor and said, "What the heck am I getting this phone call about?" And the prosecutor then filed a motion with the court and said, "Hang on a minute, that violates the dissemination order." There is a hearing coming up. I think it is next week, but I didn't jot it down, on this issue. It's strange to me because what the prosecution is saying in this case is the way that you ask for a change of venue is you subpoena your jurors, you give them jury questionnaires, and then if it appears from the jury questionnaires that there's a overall bias, then you file your motion for change of venue. Well, that makes absolutely no sense in a case this complex and this high profile. Because if they have a trial set in it next summer and they call in a whole jury panel and the defense then makes the case, we can't seat an unbiased jury, they've already got a trial date set up. Now what are they going to do? And I mean, it causes more and more delay. So the defense is saying, no, we don't want to do it that way. We don't want that delay. We really want to be able to present this information to the court in advance, let the court know what the statistics are, and then make a decision about whether or not venue can be, whether or not the case can be tried in Moscow or whether it needs to be moved. Now, Judge Boyce was very quickly convinced that the jury pool in Fremont County was so small that it wouldn't be possible to get an unbiased jury in that community, and ordered the change of venue. So both of these cases have taken place in Boise in Ada County. It will be interesting to see what Judge, who is the judge in the Kohberger case, does with this information. Because to be honest, I've never seen it done the way that the prosecution is claiming it needs to be done. I've always seen it done where the defense, in advance of the trial date, gives all of that information to the court and makes their argument for why they can't get an unbiased jury. So we'll wait to see what the judge has to say about it. I don't think that the judge is going to find that it violated their order, and it will be interesting to see how Judge rules on how the change of venue motion is going to be dealt with. Just two more short little remarks. Alec Murdaugh was sentenced on his federal theft crimes, his federal crimes, this week, and he was scheduled on the state charges for his thefts, and he was sentenced to 27 years. And so initially, the prosecution had agreed, as part of his plea agreement, that they would recommend that those charges, that he get an equivalent federal sentence, and the charges run consecutive, so at the same time, or I mean concurrent at the same time. And so the prosecution came back and said that deal was contingent on him telling the truth about where they might find some of his stolen money, because they don't believe he spent it all on opioids. So the prosecution came back and said that deal was predicated on him being honest, and we had the right to check that with a polygraph, and he's taken 2 separate polygraphs and flunked both of them. And so we're asking the court not to honor that deal. So Judge Gergel imposed 40 years. Now, he imposed 40 years. He did say that it would run concurrent, so at the same time with the state charges. And in federal court, they get 60%, they get 40% off for good time, which means that he probably will serve about 28 of those 40 years. And the Karen Reed trial is coming up next week, starting on the 16th. That is going to be a fascinating case because there is so much. I mean, there are people on the street corners picketing to free Karen Reed because they believe that the police department in Camden and the Boston Police Department are in cahoots and are covering up what really happened to John Reed. They believe that Karen Reed is innocent, and that the police department was covering up for how he really died. Canton is the community. If you want to listen to a great background to get ready for that trial, I highly recommend that you listen to Brandy Churchwell's 13th Juror podcast. She has 7 episodes in a series called Conspiracy in Canton. And Brandy is one of those people who takes every detail of the case and breaks it down. She's got charts and timelines, and she's amazing. So if you're at all interested in the Karen Reed case, that she is a great resource. Many, many creators are going to be live streaming that case. So I think before I fall apart completely and cough in your face, let's take some questions. Hi, Rachel Gamber. I haven't heard yet if Judge Boyce is letting good Lori back into the court this go round. If she said it already, I missed it. I didn't. I'm glad you asked. I did get in touch with the Ada County Court administrator, and she did let me know that I was going to be allowed in the courtroom this time. There is not an overflow courtroom this time because the case is being live streamed. So if you can't get into the courtroom, I guess they assume that you'll watch it at home. So there isn't, the only option in the courthouse is to be in the courtroom. So, and I will be applying for my ticket and attending some days. I would definitely like to to be there during some of the key testimony. And one witness that I'm particularly interested in, having seen Lori Vallow's trial, are the FBI GPS cast folks. And I do think that John Pryor is going to challenge a few more of the admissibility of some of that evidence. And thank you, Rachel. I do think that John Pryor is going to challenge more of that scientific or pseudoscientific evidence. The interesting thing about the cast information is that they're looking at the same raw data, but they're applying different algorithms and different formulas to it that the FBI has developed. And so the question is going to be, not to get too far in the weeds because I am not a scientist, but the question is going to be the reliability of that algorithm and that formula that for how they calculate exactly where in a location where a phone is. And, initially they were able to triangulate between 3 cell towers, but it was plus or minus maybe 100 feet. The CAST program narrows that down, and that's why we can say Alex Cox was in Chad Daybell's backyard and he was next to JJ's tree. So that is JJ's tree on the cover of the book, by the way, in case anybody wondered why there's a tree on the cover of the book. Anyway, so that I'm interested to hear whether John Pryor is going to have more challenges to some of that information. So I'm hoping to be in court at least some of the time. I don't think there's any substitute for being able to look around the courtroom, and particularly to get a look at the jury. The expressions on some of the jurors' faces were very telling in Lori's case. And in particular, there was a particular juror, and he was closest to the gallery. He was, it later came forward and was interviewed by Nate Eaton at East Idaho News. So if you're interested, you can go look that interview up on the East Idaho News' YouTube channel. But he was his expressions were very telling when he was listening to some of the testimony, some of the autopsy testimony, some of the testimony about Charles Vallow's murder. He was very transparent about how he felt about things. So I think it's interesting to go and get a look at the jury. And you won't see that on the live stream. You'll only be able to do that if you're in the courtroom. So, other questions? Tennis Girl, I signed up for it but did not receive an email confirming my submission. Is there a way I can verify I'm on the list? Yeah, in fact, I sent out one wave of confirming emails, and but I need to send the next group out and confirm for everybody that you're on the list. But if you went in and signed up and put all your information in, then I rest easy, you're signed up. And I'm excited to share the book with you and with everybody else in June, so you guys can all get an early look at it. Won't it be hard to separate Lori's guilt in making their decision about Chad since they conspired together? That seems confusing. This is a good question. I think it is possible to put on the evidence to show that Lori conspired with them without necessarily bringing up that she has been charged and convicted and sentenced. So there's certainly ample evidence that she was involved in the conspiracy And I think that's easily proven without having to take that extra step and say that she's already been convicted. So, but I can see how that's confusing, because there certainly is, how do we know she conspired? Well, because she was found guilty. But there is certainly a lot of evidence out there, all those text messages and everything, that really confirm that there was a conspiracy going on. So, good question. When will Rexburg release FOIA? Not until after the trial. As soon as Lori's trial was over, I filed a request for all of the sealed documents again. And surprise, surprise, Judge Boyce issued an order saying that everything that was sealed was going to remain sealed until Chad's trial was over. But I guarantee you that as soon as Chad's trial is over, I'm going to be filing those same requests again. So we'll see. Thank you, Lisa, always, for the question. And I'm anxious to see that some of that stuff that we haven't been privy to, and I'll be sharing it with you. Hi, Mary Howard. Good, Lori. I think you're giving John Pryor way too much credit. He could have hired a law clerk to be in court and help, but I think he's so egotistical, he thinks he can do it all. Just my opinion. You know, Mary, I really am not sure. I do know that as far back as last January, so a year ago in January, January of 2022, he went to Judge Boyce and told Judge Boyce that Chad was out of money and that he was indigent and that John Pryor really needed help. He went to the judge and said, I need help. And the judge actually, sorry, I'm a little foggy tonight. The judge actually told John Pryor, I'll authorize the use of state funds for you to hire co-counsel. But of course, because it's a death penalty case, that co-counsel have to be death penalty qualified if they're being paid for by the state. That's the difference between a retained attorney, John Pryor, who isn't state certified for death penalty cases, and a state provided attorney who has to be certified. So one of the problems that we're having nationwide is that it has been very difficult to attract younger lawyers into public defense because the states don't pay enough. And the rates of pay are so abysmal that people just won't go into public defense. So it's been very difficult for them to find, and lawyers my age are retiring. So they're not able to replace retirements with people who are younger and coming into the field. And what that means is that there is a shortage nationwide of public defenders. And it is particularly acute in the death penalty area. So within the state of Idaho, the last time I counted, I think there were 25 people on their death penalty roster. Not all of them are qualified to be lead counsel, because death penalty case, you have to, in order to be lead counsel on a death penalty case, you have to have sat on so many other cases as the second chair. And so there are probably half of the people who are on the panel are not qualified to be lead counsel. So what Judge Boyce said to John Pryor was, if you can find someone who can become death penalty qualified, I'll even approve that person. So John Pryor has been working with a couple of different attorneys trying to get them to apply and be death penalty certified. One of those people that he had done everything he was supposed to do and submitted it to the state to be approved, and the state still hadn't approved it at the time that John Pryor filed his motion to withdraw. So he doesn't have help. Yes, it may be because he thinks he can do it all, but I don't think so. I think that he sincerely is not able to get help just because of the circumstances. So, good questions. Let's take a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up for the evening because I don't think you guys want to hear me cough much more. Hi, Janice. Why do you think John Pryor has so many witnesses on his list? Well, I think he is determined to put on a case. And he is determined to provide Chad with the best and most vigorous defense he can. And the way that you do that is to poke holes in the prosecution's case, is to raise reasonable doubt. So I think that the people he has on his list are experts that he's going to bring in to poke holes in the prosecution's case and raise reasonable doubt. And that's his job. So I think those are the witnesses that are on his list. And, you know, it's a tactical decision. It was a tactical decision for Archibald and Thomas not to call any witnesses. So it's lawyer tactics. What witnesses do you think will be the most damaging to Chad? Well, if John Pryor can call the CAS data into question, I think that might be the most damaging, the most damaging to the prosecution's case, because I think their case really turns on being able to prove that Alex and Chad were in those locations. Now, we did not see a lot of cell phone data on Chad's cell phones other than messages that were going out to him from Lori and Alex. So I think probably that cell phone data is going to be the most damaging for Chad, because I think it's going to show right where he was. I see a question from Jane Blackbird that I'm going to answer. It says, does anyone know how long it takes Lori's book to get to hit the libraries? My understanding is that it hits the libraries, depending on if the libraries order it, because librarians have to order it. But it will become available if they have ordered it on September 3rd, the same as everybody else. So, but if you are interested in having your library carry the book, please let them know that, because they don't always order every book. But if there is interest in a book, they will order it so that it's available to check out. So I know that my publisher, and the publishing business is, I'm learning all kinds of new things about the publishing business, but my publisher does work with the organization that works with librarians. So it's different than bookstores. The bookstore clearinghouse that helps bookstores order is different than the library, but they work with both. So if you want your library to cover it, be sure and let your librarian know. Okay, one last question. While Jen's looking for a last question, I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Thanks for your patience with me being kind of hacky and coffee. And thank you for joining us tonight. I never lose sight of the fact that Wednesday, that you could spend your Wednesday night anywhere, and I appreciate that you're spending it with me. Don't forget, if you have not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. Please hit the like button. It does make a world of difference for us. I also want to say that I've appeared on a couple of other YouTube shows. I think the links are in our show notes. One is Surviving the Survivor with Joel Waldman, and the other one is The Shaming of Jay. He also goes by Court Jester, I think. And I enjoyed appearing on both those shows. IGG rocks. All that glitters isn't gold. Pryor's statement today seemed like Chad is going for a Lori bewitched him defense. Sexist defense? Absolutely. We know, we've known all along that Chad's defense is going to be, I was taken in by this femme fatale. She and her brother are the ones who did all the nefarious stuff. I didn't do any of it. I didn't know the kids were in my backyard. I didn't, I think it's a little harder for him to explain how Tammy died, but that's going to be interesting to see how they play that. But it's absolutely the case that he is going to throw Lori under the bus and back over her and Alex. So, well, I'm going to say goodnight, folks. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thanks again for your patience and for following along. Thank you to all of you who have pre-ordered the book. It means the world to me. And I will see you next week. Thanks.